When you think about a medical treatment, there's usually this expectation of mechanical precision. Like you break your arm, the X-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, "Yep, there it is."
Right, they just say, we'll put a cast exactly here and the bone will mend.
Exactly. It's a very comforting way to look at the world. We inherently like things to be visible and, binary, like broken or not broken, fixed or not fixed.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of regenerative medicine, and specifically how tissues actually heal on a cellular level, and suddenly that X-ray machine is kind of useless.
Totally useless. We're looking at a microscopic landscape that is incredibly murky and full of paradoxes. So today, we're taking you on a deep dive into the literal building blocks of your body's healing process.
And we've got quite the stack of sources today right now.
We do. We're looking at clinical protocols on platelet-rich plasma, some intense regenerative medicine research from journals like Pharmaceutics and Biomolecules, and these highly detailed studies on microvascular networks. And we're using all of this to focus on one massive question.
Which is really a fascinating biological balancing act. We're going to uncover how the concentration of a single, very specific protein in a blood clot dictates not just the physical strength of a healing tissue scaffold, but the exact timeline of new blood vessel growth.
Right, the neoangiogenesis. Because platelet-rich plasma, or PRP, is famous right now. I mean, athletes use it to recover. Dermatologists use it for skin rejuvenation. It's supposed to be this miracle healer.
Yeah, but standard PRP forms a physical clot that actually has a major flaw. It can shrink and just totally fail.
So modifying the chemistry of that clot seems like the absolute perfect fix, right? But as we're going to see, building an impenetrable fortress to fix something like a torn tendon can sometimes become, well, a biological prison.
It literally traps the very cells trying to heal you, which is, the ultimate irony of regenerative medicine. You give the body exactly what it needs for structural support, and you accidentally shut down the supply lines.
Okay, let's unpack this. If standard clots just shrink and fail, what is it about their chemical makeup that causes that? I mean, we need to start with the blueprint of the clot itself. What exactly are we dealing with here?
We are dealing with a massive protein called fibrinogen. So just to give you the baseline context, fibrinogen is a 340 kilodalton glycoprotein, and it's synthesized primarily in your liver.
Okay.
And it circulates constantly in your bloodstream. In a healthy person, your normal blood concentrations of fibrinogen sit somewhere between 1.5 to 3.5 grams per liter.
Got it. So it's always just floating around in there.
Exactly. Now, here's the catch with standard platelet-rich plasma. The stuff doctors have been injecting into bad knees for years. When they take your blood and spin it down in a centrifuge, they're concentrating the platelets, but the fibrinogen level, that actually just stays at the exact same baseline level as your normal blood.
Wait, really? Because the whole point of PRP is to concentrate the healing elements, right?
Right.
So you get a ton of platelets, but the structural protein, the actual building material for the clot, doesn't get an upgrade at all.
Exactly. The structural foundation remains completely native. And that leads us to the core problem with standard PRP as a surgical tool. It suffers from a biological process called clot retraction.
Which, if I'm reading these clinical protocols correctly, is just a very sanitized medical term for shrinkage.
Precisely. It just shrinks. Now, we should be clear that shrinkage is a completely natural, necessary biological process for minor wounds.
With a paper cut.
Yeah, exactly. If you slice your finger while chopping vegetables, you actually want that blood clot to retract. As it shrinks, it acts like tiny biological stitches, physically pulling the edges of the wound together to close the gap.
That makes sense for a cut on your finger. But, I mean, if I'm a surgeon and I'm injecting a biological matrix to fill a large defect in a torn piece of cartilage, I definitely don't want it pulling anything together.
You absolutely do not. If that matrix shrinks, it pulls away from the very tissue it's supposed to be healing. It leaves empty gaps. The cellular bridges that we're trying to form are just physically ripped apart by the tension.
It's like using cheap caulk around a bathtub. You lay down this perfect smooth bead of silicone, it looks great, but as it cures, it shrinks. And suddenly, you have a gap, the water gets in, and you have a leak all over again.
That is a perfect analogy.
So to fix this leaky bathtub scenario inside the human body, the sources outline a relatively new protocol. The idea is to modify the PRP to have a high fibrinogen content.
Right. They refer to these specialized matrices with acronyms like FMHF, which is fibrin matrix with high fibrinogen, or HFBPCP.
Which stands for high fibrinogen balanced protein concentrate plasma.
You got it. And the jump in concentration here is massive.
Yeah, it's a staggering biochemical upgrade. The sources say they're bringing the concentration factor up to nearly 4 or even up to 6.86 times the normal baseline levels.
Yes. So before the doctor even mixes it to form the gel, you're looking at concentrations jumping from that standard 2 or 3 milligrams per milliliter all the way up to around 7.18 or even nearly 27 milligrams per milliliter.
That is a huge jump. So when a doctor uses this super concentrated formula, what physically happens to the clot?
Well, when you look at the resulting matrix under a scanning electron microscope, the physical changes are dramatic. Because there's just so much fibrinogen available, it polymerizes into a remarkably dense network.
Okay, so it's just packed in there.
Exactly. And interestingly, the individual fibers of fibrin are actually thinner than in a standard clot. But there are so many of them, and they are packed so incredibly tightly together that it fundamentally changes the mechanical properties of the material.
See, I would think thinner fibers would mean a weaker clot, but you're saying it's the sheer volume of them that makes the difference.
Oh, absolutely. It's like replacing a net made of a few thick, rigid ropes with a net woven from thousands of tightly spun steel threads.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because of this density, the matrix boasts a much higher stiffness, what mechanical engineers refer to as Young's modulus. It has vastly superior energy dissipation, meaning it provides excellent cushioning and shock absorption.
Which is great if you inject it into a weight-bearing joint like a knee.
Right. And it adheres to the surrounding tissue much more securely. Plus, maybe most importantly for the surgeon, at the 24-hour mark, it almost entirely eliminates that dreaded clot shrinkage.
Which sounds like the holy grail for a surgeon. You have this tough, sticky, shock-absorbing material that stays exactly where you put it.
It's ideal mechanically.
But, okay, if standard PRP is like a flimsy net that shrinks in the wash, this high fibrinogen matrix sounds like a heavy-duty industrial cargo net. And that brings up a really obvious problem for me.
Let's hear it.
If we make the net that tight and that incredibly dense, aren't we just trapping everything inside? Doesn't a denser barrier physically block the body's own healing cells from moving around and doing their jobs?
You have just hit on the exact paradox that makes regenerative medicine so difficult. And answering your question requires us to look at the dual nature of fibrin.
Okay, what do you mean by dual nature?
Well, what's fascinating here is that fibrin isn't just a dumb physical net catching whatever floats by. It's a highly specific, interactive chemical reservoir. It basically acts like a biochemical sponge.
Explain that sponge mechanism.
Yeah.
How is it selectively interacting with things?
So fibrinogen and the fibrin fibers it eventually forms has a very specific structural region located on its beta chain. Specifically, we're talking about amino acids 15 through 66.
Right, the sources mentioned that.
Yeah, and this region is known as the heparin binding domain. Rather than just being a physical barrier, this specific domain acts like molecular Velcro for crucial growth factors that your body needs to heal.
And the sources are incredibly clear that this isn't just a random assortment of proteins getting stuck. It's very targeted.
Oh, highly targeted. We're talking about growth factors like VEGF, which is responsible for driving the growth of new blood vessels, and PDGF, which recruits structural cells.
Fibroblasts, right.
Exactly. And FGF2, which signals cells to rapidly multiply. When these specific growth factors enter the matrix, they don't just float around in the fluid between the fibers. They actively seek out and bind chemically to that molecular Velcro.
I love how specific biology gets here. The sources describe this as a literal lock and key mechanism.
It really is.
Like, for example, FGF2 has a very specific motif. It's this exact sequence of amino acids. Phe95, SIR100, ASIN102, ARG107, ARG109.
Yeah, that specific sequence acts as the perfect key to fit into the lock on the fibrin fiber.
Right, and if you don't have that exact molecular key, you don't fit the lock. Because another growth factor, FGF1, which is incredibly similar, doesn't bind to fibrin at all. The lock just totally rejects it.
And that lock and key specificity completely alters the timeline of tissue healing. Think about what happens if a doctor just, injects a liquid solution of free-floating growth factors into a damaged joint.
Just washes away.
Worse. Enzymes in the body, known as proteases, act like chemical scissors and will chop up and destroy those free-floating growth factors almost immediately.
Oh, wow. So proteolysis just wrecks them.
Right. It results in a massive, wasteful early dump of biological resources that disappears before the body can even use it.
So by binding these factors directly to the dense high fibrinogen scaffold, the scaffold physically shields them from those chemical scissors.
That is the brilliant part. The fibrin fibers literally wrap around and protect the growth factors. So instead of that massive, useless early dump, the body experiences a reduced early peak, followed by a sustained, slow release.
So as the matrix naturally degrades over weeks or months, it slowly hands out these growth factors exactly when the surrounding tissue is ready for them. Okay, so it perfectly controls the chemical release. But how does that actually play out when the body is trying to build new blood vessels? Because we have to talk about neoangiogenesis.
Yes, we do.
Because if you rebuild the cartilage or the tendon, but it doesn't establish a new blood supply, that tissue just dies, period.
Neoangiogenesis is the absolute bottleneck of all tissue repair. To understand how the fibrin matrix influences this, we have to look at the mechanics of how a blood vessel actually grows, because they don't just magically appear out of thin air.
Right, they have to come from somewhere.
Yeah. The endothelial cells, which are the cells that line the inside of your existing blood vessels, have to literally sprout outward from an existing vein or artery. They migrate in tandem, acting almost like a coordinated team of climbers.
Climbers.
Yeah, they use special adhesion molecules called integrins to grab onto the surrounding matrix and physically pull themselves forward.
So they're basically grappling hooking their way through the tissue.
Exactly. And as they push forward, they form microscopic loops, which eventually hollow out in the center to create a full-fledged vessel lumen. That's the actual tube that the blood flows through.
And the sources say this aggressive sprouting occurs at a rate of several millimeters per day.
Which, on a cellular level, is a blazing fast construction project.
It really is, but here's where it gets really interesting. When you read the research on VEGF, that vascular endothelial growth factor you mentioned earlier, the findings completely flip your assumptions upside down.
They really do.
Because the sources tracked these microvascular networks day by day.
Uh-huh.
Now, you would logically assume that if you have more VEGF present, the blood vessels should grow faster, right? Like pushing the gas pedal to the floor.
It's the most common misconception, but the data shows it doesn't change that speed limit of a few millimeters a day at all.
Right. So dumping more VEGF into the system isn't like pressing the gas pedal to make the cars drive faster. It's more like opening the toll booth sooner and building a ton of extra highway off-ramps.
That is a great way to picture it.
Because the sources show that higher VEGF simply shortens the inactive phase. The endothelial cells get the signal to start working earlier. And once they start, the higher concentration of growth factor vastly increases the branching complexity of the network.
Yes, the branching architecture is highly regulated by the matrix. The research shows that these tiny vessel sprouts consistently branch at very specific angles, usually between 60 to 75 degrees.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah, they aren't just branching blindly into the void, they are strictly following the local VEGF gradients that are held within that fibrin matrix.
Oh, because the fibrin is holding on to the growth factors.
Right, so the matrix is literally acting as a three-dimensional topographic map, telling the blood vessel climbers exactly where to turn, when to branch, and where to establish the network.
Which sounds like the perfect system. I mean, you have a super strong, heavy-duty cargo net of a clot. It isn't shrinking, it's shielding the growth factors. And it's perfectly releasing a 3D map to tell the blood vessels exactly how to grow. It sounds flawless.
It does.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
There is a significant crippling catch. And this is the central conflict explored in the research from the George lab that you pulled.
Okay, let's hear the bad news.
Well, while high fibrinogen matrix, say one bumped up to 5 milligrams per milliliter or 10 milligrams per milliliter, is an amazing mechanical scaffold that will not shrink. It severely, almost completely limits angiogenesis.
So by making the cargo net so tight, it literally stops the blood vessels from following the map.
The data on this is just staggering. If you leave the fibrinogen at a native normal concentration of around 2.5 milligrams per milliliter, the vessels grow perfectly fine. They branch, they form loops, they establish networks.
Okay.
But the moment you double that density to a 5 milligram per milliliter matrix, the total network length drops to 38.7% of normal.
Wait, that's more than a 60% loss in total blood vessel growth just by doubling the structural density?
And it gets much worse. If you push the concentration to 10 milligrams per milliliter, which, by the way, is exactly the kind of really strong, stiff scaffold a surgeon might eagerly want for a major joint repair, the vessel network length plummets to a mere 2.7% by day 21.
2.7%.
Yeah. At that density, it essentially halts blood vessel growth entirely.
How is that even possible? If the map is there and the growth factors are telling the cells to move, why does it fail so catastrophically?
Oh.
Is it simply a matter of, like, the physical holes in the net being too small for the cells to squeeze through?
It's a combination of physical trapping and a severe biochemical limitation. Yes, the matrix has a significantly lower porosity, meaning the spaces between the fibers are much smaller. But the real issue is that the endothelial cells are physically trapped because they cannot chew their way through the thick fibrin fast enough.
Wait, chew their way through?
Literally. To migrate forward, these endothelial cells can't just push the fibers out of the way. They have to produce and secrete specialized enzymes known as matrix metalloproteinases, or MMPs, specifically MT1-MMP, MMP2, and MMP9.
Okay, so what do those do?
Think of these enzymes as localized chemical sledgehammers. The cell has to rapidly swing these sledgehammers to degrade the fibrin directly in front of them so they can move one tiny step forward.
Oh, I see.
But in a high fibrinogen environment, the wall is just too thick. The endothelial cells simply cannot upregulate and produce enough of these MMPs quickly enough to tunnel through.
So they're trapped in a biological prison of our own making. They have the map telling them where to go. The toll booths are open, but they're stuck in a cement wall they can't break down.
Exactly.
But, the George Lab researchers didn't just point out this massive flaw. They actually found a cellular rescue, didn't they?
They did find a workaround. They discovered that if they distributed normal human dermal fibroblasts interstitially, which means they mixed these structural cells deep inside the gel itself, not just layered on top.
Right.
Or if they added human mesenchymal stem cells, they could entirely rescue the vessel growth even in the superdense matrices.
Because those added cells basically bring their own chemical sledgehammers to the construction site.
Essentially, yes. The addition of those fibroblasts, or HMSCs, triggered a massive early upregulation of those specific degrading enzymes. They flooded the local area with the chemical tools needed to digest the dense fibrin.
Wow.
By softening the wall just enough, they allowed the endothelial cells to finally tunnel through even the toughest, stiffest high fibrinogen scaffolds.
Okay, so bridging this back to the listener. If you're scheduled to get a PRP treatment for a torn Achilles tendon next week, and you are hearing this, does this mean your doctor has to artificially add a bunch of expensive stem cells to the syringe to make sure the treatment actually works?
Not necessarily, and that's where formulating these regenerative treatments becomes a true medical art form. In modern regenerative medicine, the goal isn't just blindly maximizing strength. The goal is to perfectly balance what we call the autologous extraplatelet content.
And autologous simply means it comes from your own body.
Right, so advanced formulations like BPCP-balanced protein concentrate plasma are explicitly designed with this density paradox in mind.
So they balance it out.
Yeah, they are engineered to give you the physical strength of the thicker fibrin so the clot doesn't shrink, but they also carefully retain a balanced profile of other native proteins, growth factors, and cellular signals.
So the doctor isn't just making cement.
Exactly. The entire goal of the physician is to hit that absolute sweet spot where you get the mechanical support, you get the slow release of growth factors, but you do it without completely suffocating the local cells that are desperately trying to build those new blood vessels.
It's a delicate tightrope.
Yeah.
I mean, you need enough serum fibrinogen so the tissue scaffold holds its ground and doesn't tear itself apart from shrinkage. But if you tip the scales even slightly too far, you form this biological prison that shuts down the angiogenesis necessary for actual permanent healing.
It really is.
It really changes how you look at something as seemingly simple as a blood clot.
It forces you to respect the microscopic architecture of the body, that's for sure. And truthfully, this density paradox raises an implication that extends far beyond just healing an isolated sports injury.
Where else does this apply?
Well, we've spent this entire deep dive talking about fibrinogen as a localized wound healer, a protein that rushes in to build a scaffold when you have a physical tear or a cut. But we have to remember that fibrinogen serves a dual purpose in the human body. It is also a systemic acute phase protein.
Meaning it circulates through your entire cardiovascular system all the time, and it reacts to overall body-wide stress, not just local cuts.
Precisely. During periods of body-wide inflammation, whether from chronic illness, poor diet, or severe stress, your liver goes into a state of overdrive. It can actively pump out so much extra fibrinogen that your systemic blood plasma levels can spike above 7 grams per liter.
Whoa! Which is more than double the high end of normal. And we just established that if you manually place 5 or 10 grams per liter into a specific tissue, blood vessels literally cannot grow, and cells get completely trapped in the dense mesh. So what exactly happens when your entire circulatory system is suddenly flooded with that much fibrinogen?
That is where the literature review source on cardiovascular disease introduces a truly sobering reality. In diseases like atherosclerosis, where dangerous plaque builds up in your arteries and leads to heart attacks, this excess circulating fibrinogen acts exactly like the dense surgical scaffold we've been discussing.
But it's building that impenetrable scaffold in the entirely wrong place.
Exactly. The accumulated fibrinogen physically deposits itself into the damaged walls of your blood vessels. And because it's so dense, so sticky, and acts like a chemical sponge, it begins absorbing and trapping LDL cholesterol right there in the artery wall.
Wow. So it isn't just that cholesterol is passively floating by and getting stuck.
Oh.
The fibrinogen scaffold is actively grabbing it, holding on to it, and building the plaque structure.
Yes. And furthermore, just like it dictates cellular behavior in a wound, that dense fibrin matrix in your artery stimulates smooth muscle cells to improperly migrate and rapidly multiply.
Which I'm guessing makes the artery even narrower.
It does. This further thickens and stiffens the artery wall. It is essentially building a highly dysfunctional, permanent structural scaffold, right where you desperately need smooth, flexible, clear blood flow.
That is terrifying.
It makes you realize that the very mechanism designed to build a protective fortress to heal an acute wound when triggered chronically might be the exact mechanism that slowly walls off our cardiovascular system.
So it's a protector that becomes a jailer.
Exactly. I would leave everyone listening with this thought. We focus so much on diet and exercise to protect our hearts, but if chronic systemic inflammation causes your liver to pump out massive amounts of fibrinogen, could the everyday invisible stress we experience actually be quietly altering the microarchitecture of our tissues?
Are we unwittingly building tiny, suffocating biological prisons in our own arteries without even realizing it?
It's definitely something to think about.
It brings us right back to the expectation of the X-ray machine. You know, the jagged white line of a broken bone is easy to see and it's easy to fix. But the invisible, microscopic architecture being built inside your arteries and your healing tissues right this very second, that is a masterpiece of biochemistry and sometimes a very dangerous trap.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you next time.